That's a really good question. I don't think that when I write, I am someone who's really like cognizant of the like trope and whether I'm subverting the trope or not. Hi there, I'm Conor McCreery, and I'm the creator and the writer of The Last Witch. You might also know me from some other projects like Kill Shakespeare, Assassin's Creed, regular show Adventure Time, and I'm really excited to be here. You can find me on Facebook through the Kill Shakespeare or Conor McCreery. I'm on Instagram as the real Connor. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky as Conor McCreery, and I'm also on Twitter as Kill Shakespeare. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by a returning guest. It has been at least, it feels like 5 or 6 years since he was last on the show. I first met him way back when at Fan Expo Canada in Toronto, of course, with Kill Shakespeare, with, of course, himself and Anthony Del Cole. If you don't know Kill Shakespeare, then you're really missing out. But he's done so many amazing works since then, and I'm happy to have him back on talking about The Last Witch. You're joined by the ever talented Conor McCreery. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Kurt. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, it has been too long.
Yeah, I
It has
know
been too
it
long.
is crazy. For those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
Okay, so I am Conor McCreery. I am a comic book writer. I've been working in the industry now for, gosh, 15 plus years. I was a journalist by trade. Earlier in my career, I worked in Canada, I worked in Africa. I had a chance to do a lot of really interesting projects. I worked a little bit in film and television at one point in my career. In fact, that's actually where I got my start. And yeah, so in comics, though, I'm known for that Kill Shakespeare series you mentioned. I've also had the privilege of working on things like Assassin's Creed and Adventure Time and Regular Show. But we're here mostly to talk about a new creator-owned project that's been coming out over the last, gosh, couple of years now, called The Last Witch. And I'm really excited to get to share that with everybody because it's a really fun all ages title that I think both parents and younger readers can enjoy.
Well, tell us about The Last Witch here because this is something that I've just seen on your social medias more recently. I've been following you for a while there, but it looks like a beautiful series. We'll talk about your team. I have lots of great questions here, but what's that elevator pitch of The Last Witch that makes you excited about pitching it to the young adult audience and anyone in general?
Sure. So what I like to say is The Last Witch is like Irish Avatar: The Last Airbender with just the right amount of child cannibalism. Um, because like if witches aren't eating kids, like are they really witches? Like who knows, right? They could just be somebody's like, European grandmother. Um, and so yeah, it's about a 12-year-old girl named Saoirse, who lives in medieval Ireland, who discovers that she can use magic after a coven of witches destroys her village, leaving only her bratty little brother, and her cigar smoking grandmother to help Saoirse master the four elemental magics to stop this coven of witches from doing something even worse than destroying her village. They're going to open this forbidden door that could end the world. And so, yeah, it is a action adventure. It's for people who I was really highly motivated by like Irish mythology, by things like The Secret of Nim or The Dark Crystal, those kind of just a little too scary style kids movies that I remember really making me like kind of stressed. But that's why I love them because I wasn't sure if the story was actually going to turn out okay. And spoiler alert, just like those movies, ultimately The Last Wish does turn out okay. But like a lot of Irish mythology, the journey for the protagonist is pretty harrowing, and they don't necessarily there's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory to this story, like there is in a lot of Irish mythology. Characters don't always get everything that they want or feel they deserve.
Do you find that's a new change of pace when it comes to young adult audience and books? Because you feel like a lot of the books are kind of coddling the reader, but you're trying to give it that fresh perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it kind of comes and goes, right? Like I do think you have, again, you look like the original Grimm's fairy tales is another great example. Like the original Little Mermaid, Ariel ends up turning into sea foam because the prince doesn't fall in love with her and she loses, she doesn't fulfill her end of the bargain and she's cursed to actually turn herself into sea foam, right? Or she has to stay on land in great pain, unable to talk for the rest of her life. So, like those stories, they've always been kind of dark. They've always been sanitized a bit. And I mean, I'm a father of three. My thought has always been kids can deal with what they're ready to deal with, and the things that don't work for them, they tend to either ignore or not engage with. So I'm never really worried about my kids seeing, something that is, horribly inappropriate. Like, there's obviously within reason, you're not going to put your kid in front of something that's clearly not designed for them. But I think if you've got a story that's designed by a creator who cares about their audience, and wants to take them on a really amazing journey, but wants to keep the trust that you have when you're telling a story, right? You have certain expectations and there are certain things you agree to in a story, especially in the kids genre, then yeah, I'm never worried about a story getting a little too scary or a little too intense. I think for some readers, they really get pulled in by that. And some readers just kind of skim through that part. If the really scary witch that you see in the second issue of the beginning of The Last Witch, and she is quite a scary witch, if that's too much for a kid, and I've done presentations to hundreds and hundreds of children, some kids they stay on that page and they're flipping back and forth because they like love how scary this witch is. And other kids are reading it quickly and then they're moving on. They're not engaging, they're just engaging to the level that they want to engage in. So I think there's always that stuff exists under the radar, but I do think that for like mainstream entertainment, especially for younger readers, yeah, I think people tend to err on the side of caution. Pixar would be an interesting example. Like Toy Story 3 is pretty intense.
Yeah.
Um, but I think Pixar is never afraid to go into the emotional depths and allow kids to be in emotionally challenging places. They just have not yet done that in a horror genre. And that's really what The Last Witch is. It is a horror genre, but it is aimed at an all ages, and so it is a little creepy. It is a little scary. It is a little intense. But at the end of the day, it's still something that as a parent, I want to write stuff that I don't want to write something that's going to make a kid feel unsafe or uncomfortable, but I'm perfectly okay putting them into spaces where they're like, wait a second, how is this going to work out? Or, but the good guy's doing some things that are not always good.
Mm.
And I think most kids actually can engage with that because we forget kids are way more complicated and complex than we give them credit for, right? Like they're having these thoughts and these emotions and these feelings. And so seeing characters that are about their age or a little older dealing with stressful situations is actually, I think, kind of cathartic
Mm.
because kids deal with stressful stuff and we kind of forget how stressful it is to be a kid sometimes, right? We have this like rose-colored glasses of, oh yeah, man, when I was like 9, life was easy. And you just forget about the stuff that you were dealing with that was hopefully not intense in like absolute terms, but was certainly intense for you at 9.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, all we had to do was play outside till the lights came on, drink out of the hose, and put a band-aid on a scratch.
Yeah, that's what we think. And then you forget that, oh yeah, when I was playing with the hose, that like mean kid from 2 streets over came and he like shoved my friend over, that I was terrified I was gonna get shoved, and like I like ran out of the yard, and then I felt guilty for like 2 weeks because like I left my friend, but we were still, like,
Yeah.
not just pulling something out of thin air. Like, that's the kind of stuff that we forget about, that like those things do happen. We just like, oh yeah, I ran around, I had a scratch, and you just forget about Bruno, that guy.
I'm not going to dive into your psychological childhood there. So you're
Or it's like that cost extra.
yeah, exactly. Saoirse's defiance, ignoring her father to chase the witch, I think is a really interesting classic YA trope. But you subvert it. What's a rule about writing rebellious heroes you deliberately broke to make her feel fresh?
That's a really good question. I think, I don't think that when I write, I am someone who's really like cognizant of the like trope and whether I'm subverting the trope or not. Um, I think naturally, I've always been kind of like an indie person, right? Indie music, indie movies, all that sort of stuff. So I think I have a natural bent just kind of wanting to subvert tropes a little bit, sometimes to my strength, sometimes to my detriment. Every once in a while I'm like, can I just write like just a classic, like a well done, I just saw F1, the movie, right? There's nothing groundbreaking about F1, but it's a really well put together, big Hollywood movie with a good script and good actors. And I'm like, I would probably make more money if I just did that every once in a while. Um, but I think with Saoirse, like, I think sometimes with anything, it is when you get kind of too caught in the idea of the trope. Oh, the character is rebellious. Like anytime a character is just one thing, I think you tend to run into less interesting characters than you can add. So yes, Saoirse is rebellious. She, does the first book of The Last Witch, which came out a few years ago, which the book that I just released is kind of a sequel to. That first book is very much about this beginning of Saoirse feeling like she is an outcast. And she is. Her family are outcasts. Her grandmother is this weird old lady who brews potions in the woods that people will go to when they want a love potion and then totally shun afterwards. Saoirse has a weird birthmark. She has no friends. It's this one other boy in the village, and he's kind of an outcast too. And so she is. She's really chafing against what she feels she is, which is this kind of outcast that nobody likes. And she lost her mother a few years ago in the first Irish famine, and so she is. She's kind of alone and she's angry. But she's not just alone and angry. I mean, she is going against her father's wishes because in the Irish mythology, Groundhog Day is not about a cute little rodent popping up, seeing its shadow or not. It's actually the day that the colic, which is the queen of the witches, is out.
Hmm.
And so in Irish mythology, that day in the winter, if it was sunny, that was bad news because a witch had made it sunny because they knew the colic knew that there was going to be more winter. So she had a day of sun so she could gather firework easily so that she could stay warm through the rest of this longer winter. And also, she has something to cook kids with, right? So this is the day that Saoirse wants to go out past the hedge into the forest to find this, rumored falling apart old tower that her and this little boy are going to race to, and one of them, whoever brings something back, is going to prove how special they are, right? And her dad is like, "You're insane. Going out today is the last day you can go out. Like, you could get killed by a witch." And Saoirse's like, "Witches don't exist." And of course, anybody who's ever read a story knows that as soon as a character says, "Witches don't exist," I'm like, well, yes, they do, my friend. And so, yeah, so while she is rebellious against her father, there's a scene, a couple of beats later where you see them bonding, right? And like, it's like, everybody's had that situation where you've been mad at somebody you care about, but that doesn't mean that like 30 minutes later, you're not treating each other well again, right? And so, she is rebellious, but it's not like she just hates everybody and everything. She does love her father deeply. Her brother drives her nuts, but one of the real key bonds of the series is that she loves her brother very much, this little brother of hers. And anybody who's had a younger sibling knows that relationship between like, oh my gosh, get out of my stuff, but also like you're kind of feel like, your little sibling kind of feels a little bit like a kid, like your own child, because you kind of help raise them in a little bit as you get older. And so yeah, I don't know if there's anything like that I'm consciously like, oh, in this scene, I want to subvert the trope of character X. I think for me, I just want to make sure that characters are multifaceted. And I think that sometimes does, subvert tropes because tropes, when they're used poorly, end up being a little one-dimensional. When a trope is used really well, then it's something that everybody can hang their hat on and be like, oh, I know that character or I know that situation. It makes it feel, like think of something like Up, right? It stars a grumpy old man, right? Which should be the most hackneyed, overused trope in the history of storytelling. But Up is one of the greatest movies of the last 20, 30 years because of why he's a grumpy old man and what makes him not a grumpy old man. And so I think that's just what you're aiming for as a writer is multifaceted characters blow up trope expectations while at the same time allowing you to tell a very tropey story. And The Last Witch is a very tropey story in many ways.
That also brings to my attention the tagline. I always love taglines in books because it's like, oh, it's that bullet point. You see it on posters. It's just one of those exciting things that should draw you into a story, and this does for sure. And you have the classic line, "You have the power." I mean, I'm thinking to He-Man and things like that when I when I hear that line. But I'm an '80s kid, so there you go.
Me
Uh,
too.
but that also suggests internal magic over external battles, though. When it comes to either psychology or when it comes to magic, however you're playing it in your series here, was there a scene where you had to remove action to emphasize that theme?
If anything, I probably need to be someone who adds action. I am very, very much someone who loves talky movies, talky
Yep.
stories. I love, I think a battle of words can be, again, I did a series called Kill Shakespeare, right? So I am somebody who was groomed on the idea of like people arguing with each other or mocking each other or testing each other with words, right? That's one of the things that Shakespeare does so well is you have these characters who just, it's tennis. So if anything, I probably need to like make sure I have enough like action set pieces because that's not what comes to me naturally. I wouldn't say they're like hard, but like if you're asking me where do things first start? It's always with a character rebutting somebody and saying like, no, that's not how it is. That's always how I get into my characters' heads. And it's funny you say about that idea of the internal external because a big part of the series, book two, which the first issue just came out late last month,
Mm.
is very much we're diving into the key parts. So, I mean, at the outset, it's like, okay, Saoirse versus the witches. But as we get through book one, and now as we begin book two, we realize that the more important battle is this idea of the internal battle. And that's because in the rules of the world of the Last Witch are that magic is not from our world. Magic is from behind that door, from the fairylands. And it kind of leaks through, and it always has leaked through. Is why Ireland has the tales of the leprechauns and the banshees. The magic and the creatures have been able to pass through, even when the door has been closed, but certainly before that. And so that magic is not for us. It is not something that is natural to us. And so in The Last Witch, when you run into the witches, several of them are actually quite deformed, and the others are evil, evil, evil. And the reason for that is because the magic is corrupted and changed them, right? So using magic changes you. All these evil witches did not start out evil, but it was the use of magic that did it to them. And so Saoirse, like every time she learns a new spell, every time she masters a new form of magic, she is getting closer to stopping this coven of witches and keeping that door closed and saving all of us. But she's also getting closer to losing what makes her her
Mm.
and to start becoming one of them, a witch, maybe even the last witch. And so there is like a Breaking Bad kind of thing running in the background of this story. And that's one of the reasons why, I really wanted to make sure that even though, you do have that classic trope in stories of the parents, like every Disney movie, right? Like every Pixar movie, parents get killed, right? Parents are not there, they're gone. There's something just so like fundamental for children's stories about children having to go on their own. But it was really important to me that while this was still true for Saoirse, that she had her Obi-Wan Kenobi character was her grandmother, and that her sidekick character was her brother, because they are going to have a very different viewpoint of their granddaughter and their sister starting to break bad. And so that is a lot of the tension behind the scenes of this book is the grandmother and the brother knowing they have to help Saoirse gain this power because if they don't, it's all over. But also being terrified about what that means and what's going to happen to Saoirse, and also Saoirse feeling strong and powerful and feeling special for the first time in her life. And maybe she's not willing to give up what makes her special, even if it's changing her. And so, from an under the layer, from something that I hope adults would really dig into, and that also, younger readers will certainly pick up, is this idea, like you said, of you have the power, but what does it mean to have power? The classic Spider-Man, right? Great power, great responsibility. And so, yeah, that's kind of all weaving underneath on what is hopefully generally a very fun action adventure of a girl with magic who fights witches, who's got a goofy little brother and a sidekick who shows up halfway through who likes to walk on his hands and put his smelly feet in people's noses. Like, it's meant to be a fun adventure, but when it gets intense, it gets intense.
Saoirse's Mark brands her as another. What's a time you felt like an outsider, and how did it shape her voice?
I mean, I think partially, this is going to sound, a little trite, but I mean, partially being a redhead for sure, right? Like, I remember, being an 80s kid like your Kurt, we grew up in a time where people were less um, tolerant and respectful of differences. And so being a redhead was a pretty minor difference, right? I mean, of all the things, like, I'm certainly not comparing that to anything, more significant. But I do remember being like 5 or 6, no, maybe a little older. And my mom had given me a book about why it was great to be a redhead
Mm.
and why I should be proud to be a redhead because she had been horrifically teased and mocked for being a redhead. And I had certainly I got some of it. I was actually really lucky that the bully in my grade school was also a redhead. And so like he might beat the crap out of me for all manner of reasons, but nobody really talked talked crap about being a redhead because like this, kid who's probably been in fifth grade for 7 years would just like beat the snot out of you. But certainly, going through your life, you do like it is a bit of a weird thing. People, definitely the hair is a bit of a thing. I've had people react to me specifically because of my hair, either positively, like, oh, I love redheads, or negatively, like, oh, you'd be cute. Too bad you're a redhead. Somebody actually took the time out at a club to walk up and tell me that. And I was always like, okay, okay, thank you for, I don't, why did you feel the need to vocalize that? So it's just a minor thing that gives you a feeling of being different, but you do get teased about it. And again, it is very minor, but I think that it, gave me a little bit of insight. You do feel like you're not the same. You do kind of wish you looked a little bit different. And I'm sure everybody, honestly, pretty much everybody has this for different reasons, right?
Yeah.
Being tall, being short. Like my wife is very tall. She hated being tall, right? She's almost 6 feet. She hated it, right? That was the thing that made her feel, and so I think there's something actually very universal about us feeling like outcasts. I feel like the only people who don't feel like outcasts are people who have like really no inner life, you know, like the only who just have no ability to examine themselves because everybody can look in the world and be like, oh, I'm different in some way. Like even look at the world's most successful like athletes, basketball players, like you'll hear them be like, oh yeah, it kind of sucks because like I'm so tall. And so anywhere I go in the world's not made for me. And it's also like 100% obvious. Like I was listening to this one guy who's like a 6'1" player. And he's like, oh, all the other players, though, it was hard for them because even if you had no idea who they were, their height marks them as this, there's something different or weird about
Yeah.
you. And these are people making tons of money for playing a game and their life is super easy in retrospect, right? But so yeah, I do think that was just something I carried through. And I also think if you're just someone who is interested in other people, you see when other people feel like an outcast, right? Everybody has friends where you've been in a moment and you're like, oh man, they just got othered for whatever reason. Could be because they're a huge geek, and they're talking to people who they're in a space where nobody's a geek,
Yeah.
and they feel really uncomfortable because everybody else is talking about sports or whatever, and they don't feel like they have that ability to communicate. And so yeah, I just think if you kind of pay attention to other people and you pay attention to yourself, I think we all deeply understand what it feels like to feel uncomfortable and like the only person in the room who's like us. And so yeah, I just try to channel that, I guess. But again, my experience with that is pretty minor compared to some people's experience, which is could be actually like life-threatening.
Yeah.
Maybe people want to kick a ginger, but that's about as far as it goes.
I'm 5'3", so I almost got mistaken by a little person if I was a tall little person. So I was just like, okay, that's
Yeah,
nice.
people
Thanks,
make tons of
appreciate it.
stupid jokes that you've heard a million
Yeah,
times about being 5'3". It's just like, yeah, yeah, I
it
get
is.
it.
It is
Like,
what it is. Yeah, it's like and then you start making jokes about yourself, and then that's called self-deprecating humor, and apparently that's not good for you, and you have to go to therapy. But whatever it is.
well, I mean, and it's tricky, right? Because it's like, because we're veering off topic here, but I do think like that's a really interesting point because it's like self-deprecating humor is this great way where you're like taking the power out of somebody. Okay, I'll make the joke first. But you're right, unless you're actually really, and especially when you're young, you just don't
Mm.
have the tools for this. Unless you're like really intentional about, okay, I'm making jokes about my height, my hair color, my whatever, because that deflects all this other stuff. But you're also very clear with like, but I actually think like what I am is great.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's a slope.
being a
Yeah,
human is hard
yeah,
sometimes, Kurt. Being a
yeah.
human is hard sometimes.
It is, and we have to make do with what we can, and we have our creative outlets. I talk to people, you create books. It's a wonderful cycle as it is. So hopefully people enjoy what we're doing and they can smile about their lives too.
Monetizing our like lack of self-love or something like.
I'm curious here. You're obviously a wonderful wordsmith that you are here. What's a line in the last wish that made you think, "Is this too dark?" And why did you keep it?
I mean, maybe I don't know if I would say too dark.
Mm,
So there's something that happens in book issue one of book two. So that's the issue that's just come out of The Last Witch. It's available in comic shops. If you're listening to this and you don't know about The Last Witch, I would suggest you go and get book one, which is called Fear and Fire. And that's like kind of what we've been talking about, this discovery of the magic and learning to fight the witches. And Saoirse sort of starting to like change because of the what magic does to a person. Um, I mean, lines, no. There's some stuff in issue 2 of the first book where we meet that kind of very frightening witch that are like right on the edge. The artist V Glass, who is tremendous,
Mhm.
has done some things with the art that is just like I've shown this to tons of kids, and they have, some kids literally have the pullback moment, right? And then they lean in, and that's like when you know you got them. But in terms of a line, I don't know if it was too dark. I mean, it's more like Pat thinks like, Saoirse comes out having just had this horrific encounter with this witch where she realizes that her friend had been captured and cooked and her brother had been paralyzed and was about to be cooked and she's barely escaped and maybe she's a witch and did somebody just die? Like, did that witch just die? Was I responsible for that? And she gets out and she sees her grandmother and her grandmother does not have time for any of her problems because her grandmother's like, everybody's dead. It's beginning again, the end of the world. So like that's like a dark like
Mhm.
run of things. But I would say in issue number 1 of book 2, Saoirse and Brom finally get a moment to kind of calm down. Saoirse's still very wound up. She's become very wound up. Her brother and Hugh, who's a sidekick character that they've met, he's this half fairy boy who wants to help Saoirse because he knows what's behind the door and he knows that if it gets out, that's really bad. And he might have a bit of a crush on her. Um, and so Brom and Hugh were just playing. They're playing an Irish game called hurling. And they're able to convince Saoirse to play. It's a game she used to play with her father, so she's playing with her brother, and they get to have this moment of just fun and relaxing and getting to be a family. And of course, because of what has to happen in a story, that gets interrupted by the presence of a different witch, a new type of group of witches that we haven't met. And they give Saoirse some new information about magic, how it can be used, what it's doing to Saoirse, and they're kind of telling her that everything she thinks she knows is wrong, and that what she's doing is wrong. And it makes her very angry. And so there is a confrontation between Saoirse and her brother where she really loses it and she's like grabbed his arm and she's like yelling at him about how he doesn't understand and he should be as angry as she is because these witches have kind of told her like, the thing that Brahm and her grandmother haven't really wanted to say, which is you're getting angry. That's the magic that's doing that. It's only going to get worse. And she loses her temper and tells him that, her mother is dead, the father is dead, everybody they know is dead. And like, that's all her responsibility. And he needs to basically just shut up and listen to her and let her do what she needs to do. And so that was a scene where when I wrote it. It was really beautifully illustrated, but I still read it and I think it's important. But it's one of those ones where you're just on the edge, not necessarily of being too dark, but you're like, will I lose the audience with this character?
Mhm.
Have we done enough to make sure that the audience cares about this character? Saoirse's fought witches, like again, like depending on how you read the book, not all these witches necessarily survived. It's possible that we have a 12-year-old girl who is like killed witches, like it's all kind of off panel, so it's never really dealt with. But if you're really following the story, you're like, okay, like some intense things have happened. But is this too far, right? Her grabbing her little brother and yelling at him and making him very upset. And the way we made it work is instead of having Brahm fade into himself and like cry, where I think that would be a really um, a really big kind of weight to put on a main character to have had them do something like that to this little brother who's 100% right in the scene. As a reader, you're like, yeah, he's right. Brom fights back because it's sister, and like you don't take that kind of crap from your siblings. And so I think that makes the scene work is because he fights back. Her anger is while still unwarranted, and while you're like, whoa, this may be the worst thing she's done in a story where she's using fire and water and all this stuff to fight witches. I think it still works in the story because Braun fights back. You're like, okay, he's stuck to his guns, and because he fights back, the way Saoirse reacts to that fight is something that humanizes her a little bit. So it wouldn't have been a case of too dark. Um, but I mean, the only other thing I can think of, and it's a bit of a spoiler, is something happens to Brom physically that was probably a little more extreme than you might normally see in this type of story. Although again, I don't, there's nothing, V does an amazing job
Mhm.
of hinting at kind of horrific things that happen kind of just off panel. So we can see the effects of them, but we don't see the actual thing that happens. And I think that's a big difference. There's a big difference between seeing somebody getting hurt and then seeing the aftermath of that,
Mhm.
where One is too much, and one is something like, oh my gosh, a horrible thing has happened, but you didn't have to live like really through the
Right.
horrible thing. And then there's one thing in book two, it's a huge moment, and I'll have to leave that to the readers to decide if we've gone too far. But it is a huge, huge moment. It's going to happen in issue three, I think, and issue two comes out at the end of this month. And that's probably the that when I wrote this story, I like I said, I've got three kids. My older two kids got to that part in the story and they were like, it was almost like the Princess Bride kind of thing. Like they shut the story and they were like, no, no, Dad, that's not what happens. That's not what happens. That's not okay. No, that's not all right. That's not what happens. You have to change that. I don't know. And I'm like, that's exactly what has to happen. And they're like, no. And so it is a little bit like Fred Savage being like, no, Grandpa, like that's not how these stories go. So I'll leave that to the readers to decide what they think about that. But I think it'll be memorable and, knock on wood. I think it'll be one of the moments that hopefully will make people be like, oh man, this was a story that was really worth my time because it it pushed things as far as it could go in this type of genre. And, I haven't read many kids books that have gone there, but also done, and I'm very confident that it's done this in the right way, in that people will look at the story and be like, wow, that was a big emotional moment and the story is so much better because of it. But in the moment, I wasn't happy as a reader. But in the fullness, it made the whole story better. So we'll see. Anyways, I don't mean to be too cryptic, but I
Yeah.
don't want to give away, kind of what one of the big moments of the finale of this adventure.
No, of course. The last thing I would want you to do is give a spoiler without at least me saying spoiler alert. Things,
There's an alarm that goes off.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just how you graphic and the whole thing. It's a production value, aspect of the show. Talking about your team, and this is something that I love because you've assembled a powerhouse team for The Last Witch. You have Vivi Glass on art, you have Natalia Nestrenko on colors, you have Taylor Esposito on letters. When assembling the Last Witch team, what was one thing you thought you needed in a collaborator?
I think always with art, I always want to work with artists who have strong ideas and who are storytellers in their own right, um, who will have the ability to make suggestions, challenge your decisions in a way that is not confrontational, but is just like, hey, what if? Because, as a writer, I know I'm not an artist, but Andy Belanger was great for this on Kill Shakespeare. He was the artist through most of the run of Kill Shakespeare, and Andy would 100% challenge us when he thought there was some better way to do things, and often he was right. And Andy was also really good if we came back and we're like, hey, like I think we should change this page for these reasons. Andy was always really good that if you had a good reason, he would think about it and then he would come back and most times he'd be like, yeah, and then he would have built on your idea and made it into his own and better than your idea was. And so yeah, so V is someone like that. I find V is like they're super easy to chat with. They have no ego about their work. They are very comfortable making suggestions, weighing in. Um, they're very polite. Like they may have more thoughts about the story, but they're certainly not being like, oh, here's how I'm going to make it my story. Like, and push you out of it as the writer. But they're just a very good storyteller. And so, when I'm noodling and trying to be like, there was a part when I wrote the last, which was actually written as one big book. It was
Right.
originally meant to come out as one big book. Um, but because of COVID and some other things, it ended up getting cut in half. Actually, it was cut in half, and then they're like, "We need you to write more because it's not quite long enough to be cut into half."
Okay.
Which, as a writer, you're like, "Write more? Yes." Um, and so there was then COVID happened and then other things happened. So there's actually been like a 4-year break between book one and now book two coming out.
Hmm.
And again, it was all meant to be one story. It's all written at one time. But during that break, as you're noodling, there was a big moment where I was toying with like making a pretty substantial change to how the end of the book worked. And V was so great in just being such a good sounding board, but also really like articulating why they thought the change made sense and like hearing them articulate it, you're like, oh, that is what I'm trying to get at, but I didn't realize. And then it gave such clarity for a bit of a rewrite towards the end. So yeah, V's fantastic. Their art is amazing. Like anybody who's picked up this book, or you can see some of the art below, like the art is the star of this book. Like I think I've told a really strong story, but V's work is just at another level. Anybody who picks up this book, anybody who looks at it is blown away. V has this incredible ability to both make very simplistic character design. So the characters like pop. It feels kind of Disney-esque,
Yeah.
people have told me, but their ability to create backgrounds that you feel you can step into is just sensational. And for me, I love creating worlds and having it's very important to me that when you're trying to create different locations and different worlds, that you feel like you can step into them. And V's work does that. I think you get to page 3 or 4, and when Saoirse and this other little boy are going to go in the forest, and she draws this great, almost splash page of the forest. And you just feel like you could walk through that forest. When you get to the witch's tower, it feels like you could turn corners and find more. And so I think that's so important. There's not a lot of these like my personal pet peeve in comics is when there's too many panels
Mm.
where it's just like a color behind, and like I get that that's useful for many reasons, but when there's too many, you're just like, I'm not in a place anymore. And V's incredible with that. And then Natalia was just, we were lucky Natalia was a colorist. I'd wanted to work with V on a different project before. So V had been on my radar. We had had a conversation. And when The Last Witch got picked up, V was the first person I thought of. Natalia, we were introduced to through Boom, and they've just been a perfect complement to V's work. I've worked sometimes with colorists and artists where there can be a bit of creative friction in terms of having different viewpoints. Artists obviously have thoughts about how their work is colored, and Natalia and V are just on the same page. They're so good at communicating with each other, and Natalia's work is absolutely incredible. I think also Natalia does the same thing where on first blush, it seems like the coloring is a little simplistic. I think that gives it that kind of, again, that very familiar, welcoming Disney style. You pick up the book, and this feels like a friendly book for kids. And I think that's one of the reasons that the book can be sometimes as dark and challenging as it is,
Yeah.
because the look of it is still so clean and so beautiful and so bright, even in the dark places. Um, that I think that really, it gave me a bit of a license as a writer to go some places that are a little, I've said this a few times, to go some places that are, it is a horror story for kids kind of. And that um, that was very satisfying. And I think it made the book work way better because you have that juxtaposition between, this horrific witch and this beautiful environment that they're in.
When I got to see the full pages and I got to look at the artwork and other things that you sent me, which I appreciate, it's just it is a very beautiful book. I could see this as an animated series. I could see this in some other type of medium, however you want to decide to do that, if that's something in the future. I wouldn't say no to that. I think that would be pretty amazing to see on a screen as well. What's a scene that you got back when you were going through the creation of this book with V and with Natalia that was way better than what you had written on the page?
Everything. Um, few things. There's a few that I think of. Okay, so one is I've talked about it a few times already. It's the beginning of book issue 2. Saoirse has gone into the forest. They found the crumbling tower. Her friend is nowhere to be seen, and suddenly her brother is missing. And the tower had this kind of locked door they couldn't get in, and now the door is open, and there's this like bloody handprint beside it. And you walk through there, and I really wanted this to be this kind of intense, scary moment. She walks in, a bit of a steal from Secret of Nim. If anybody's seen that movie, there's the great owl, and when Miss Brisby, who's the mouse, goes in, there's all these bones that she has to go over, bones of mice. And so Saoirse has a similar experience as she crosses the threshold of this door. It's just like a carpet of bones. And then there's the witch, and the witch is singing the song. And this little boy that was Saoirse's friend is supposed to be there, but he's clearly been cooked already. And her brother is there, but he's been frozen by magic. And so, a lot of scary things are happening. And that scene, it's about 8 or 9 pages, I think, it's just incredible. It's just incredible. It's the thing that everybody has this visceral, immediate visceral reaction. And there's a close-up of Brahm who's frozen, and the witch has got this claw-like hand on his chin, and there's this one tear going down, which I think is just so effective. Like it's for me, it's scary. I'm like, wow, like we talk about things that are dark, it's like that's a point that just describing it, oh, a boy's crying. But in the context is like that's the sort of stuff that my kids were like, because they could see themselves. What if that was me? Right? So that stretch is just incredible. There's all the witches battles really. Like all the witches battles turned out even better than I could have hoped. There's a battle later in the first book between between Saoirse and the Water Witch. that is just so beautiful. There's so many amazing angles that V chose to show the clash of fire and water. Um, that's really, really incredible. There's some very fun little scenes. Again, I it would be a bit of a spoiler, but there's a great scene with Brahm, which is a bit of a callback to early in the book. Of just like it's hard for you to explain this, but like I'm just like joke that he likes to play with his sister. That just the all the acting was just nailed like out of the park. Honestly, I think there's like one panel in the entire 368 pages of the two volumes. There's like one panel I look like and I'm like, ah, if we could have that one back, I'd like to have that one back. Like one panel. Um, the the introduction of the big bad, even worse than the Queen of the Witches, this monster that is behind the door is incredible. That just yeah, I think every time I wrote something, he just really understood the emotion of what I was trying to get in all the scenes, and so their art just leveraged that. And, now I've come to kind of understand that's really kind of the key. If you and the artist both understand what the emotional context of a scene is meant to be, then that is going to elevate the scene because, your words do what your words do. But there's a reason why, a picture is worth 1,000 of them, right? And so when the art just screams whatever emotion you want, whether it's terror or love or excitement or whatever, right? Like joy, when you hit that, like there's a great panel of Brahm being saved by a bunch of martens, which are cute little like I don't know, giant squirrels for lack of a better term. Small foxes, giant squirrels. And it's just great. There's like all these martens and they're like rubbing against him. And he's like, he's like a 8-year-old boy who's being carried by a bunch of like giant, small foxes. And he's just like, this is the best day ever. And just like, it's like two panels, but it's incredible. Like I just, every time I turn over them, I'm like smiling. So yeah, again, this is just another love letter to the work that Via and Natalia have done, but it really is incredible. Like they should be, I'm I'm of two minds. Like one, I'm like, oh man, they should both be way bigger stars than they are in this industry. And then the second part of me is like, yeah, but if they aren't, then it means that they'll keep just doing stuff with you because they really like doing your work. And you're like, your work comes out at a high enough level to be worth their time. So yeah, I'm always balancing that. I'm like, they should be doing Thor, but also no, don't. I do my like weird sci-fi thing I've got going next.
What's a line in The Last Witch you tattoo on your arm as a life motto?
Oh man, what is a line of a tattoo? Um, maybe I'm probably going to misquote myself here, which is awesome. But in the second book, there's a bit where Brahm is he's a boy. He's still this little kid. So even though he's dealing with this crazy life and death scenario, he's been told to stay back, but he's not going to stay back. And so he's grabbed like a cloak that was in the caravan that they travel in, and he's kind of had this like, my two boys are always picking up sticks when we go on walks. They always find like the perfect stick, and that's stuck in my head. So he's found this great stick, and in the moment, he's decided that he's going to name the cloak and the stick because that's what, every hero has a named sword. And so he's named his stick Hagsbane because, that's he's going to fight witches. And then he just has this weird conversation with this stick. And it ends with him being like, no, Haggy, we're not going to drink blood. That's not all right. And for some reason, that's the first line that came to my mind. No, we're not going to drink blood. That's not all right. I feel like there's a good metaphor for like sticking up for yourself, but like at a certain level, if you do too much damage to something or someone that's an adversary, it's just negative for everybody, right? You know, stand up for yourself, fight for what you believe in, but like we don't need to drink blood. Maybe in this time of political discourse and very, hey, we should 100% stick up for what we believe in. We should 100% be fighting
Sure.
for a better, safer, kinder world. But a better, safer, kinder world also means the people on the other side. So it's like we gotta like can't let them do horrible things, but at the same token, we ultimately are gonna be better off if we're all in the same tent. So we can't drink blood. We can't drink blood.
Although the vampires would kind of kindly disagree, but
Well,
that
that's
is
fine.
their
Hey,
choice.
I'm not calling out Vampire Canadian. I
Right.
understand that they've got their place in our great nation. You can drink it sustainably.
Sure.
There are options.
What's a song Saoirse would hate but secretly need?
A song that you would hate but secretly need. Okay, well, since Saoirse's kind of comes out of my own brain, I'm gonna say it's something probably that I would be in that space. It would probably be something like What would it be? I'm trying to think. It would probably be something that was like really popular and a huge hit, but more like kind of more like 80s or 90s
Mm,
like rock that like One Headlight by the Wallflowers. It'd be something like
oh
that, like
yeah,
one of these kind of like banal. I'm trying to think of one that like um oh, is it Jumper by Third Eye Blind that I
yeah,
wish
yeah,
you
yeah,
would
yeah,
step up from that ledge, my friend.
yeah.
That it would be a song like that, right? Because like that would actually be, now that you got me thinking, that would actually be really into Saoirse because like she does need to step off that ledge, and the people around her would understand. Like they're literally witnessing her going, it's not like the people in her, because I hate that in stories where there's like needless conflict,
Mm.
right? Like where people are like, you gotta stop doing that, McTaggart. And you're just like, but he's the frickin' like what? Why? No, like I much prefer conflict where it's like there's a bit of nuance. It's like, McTaggart, I know you need to do that, but you can't do it that way, where it's like, oh, okay, now we don't have to have this stupid fight about whether like I'm a cop. It's gonna be like, we can get down to the more interesting question of like, is the cop losing his soul? Has he become a bad cop? Is he using too much for like that's way more nuanced and interesting. So I think I probably Jumper by Third Eye Blind would be a song that she would hate. But then if she actually listened to it and she was actually be like, oh, okay, I get what you're trying to say to me. And maybe I am on the ledge, because that is a big part of this story. So there you go. I would never thought this interview was going to go anywhere near Third Eye Blind, which is a band but I
Yeah,
have to respect they have a fan base, and honestly that song doesn't suck. I just want it to.
gonna have to tag him in this interview. Uh,
Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's take
sure,
it. Maybe
yeah,
they might have kids who are
yeah,
reading
yeah.
books. Let's go. Let's go, Third Eye Blind. Not the
What's
Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh
And I
God,
know they're
no, no,
Buffalo. I
no,
know they're the
no,
like the heroes of Buffalo.
no.
And apparently the Goo Goo Dolls have a huge fan base, but I've got a third eye blind for the Goo Goo Dolls because I just can't. I just won't let myself see it. All right, anyways, no more
Yeah.
no more middle of the road 90s semi alternative.
What's a non-fantasy book or movie, like a thriller or memoir, that influenced The Last Witch more than readers would guess?
I don't know. That's a good question. I might have to actually think on that and then like
Sure.
respond to the posting of this with my answer. Because yeah, I'm trying to think of something like I know what the obvious, and I've already said like The Secret of Nim, Dark Crystal,
Right. Yeah.
Irish mythology, Brothers Grimm, like all of that is really in there. I mean, Roald Dahl's The Witches, but that's still kind of in the same
Yeah.
genre. That had a pretty big influence on the book. Huh. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to do some thinking about that. I bet you there's something in there that I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a story I love that found its way. But there's nothing that like I'm like, oh yeah, for sure, that
Mhm.
was something that I was thinking about.
Uh,
I mean, Swiss Family Robinson,
Sure.
just in the sense of like kids kind of being marooned on their own, I guess, a little bit, but that's a lot of different genres. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to do some more thinking on that one, Kurt.
Well, then try to finish the sentence. Most
Who
people
knows?
think magic is about blank, but really it's about blank.
Okay. I would say that like many people think that magic is about like the powers, the external, like what the magic can do. But really magic is about the internal, right? It's about what your intentions are for it, who you are as a person. The idea of dark magic, or all that is, really it's the user, not it's the person, not the tool.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say, and I think you kind of hit that at the very beginning when you were talking about the tagline, is that is part of the story, is this idea of like at the end of the day magic is just a tool. It's the magician, it's the person. That's the real key, and that's what defines whether the magic is, it's good or bad. But yeah, I think for sure we get caught up on the idea of like, that's the fun part of magic is what it can do, the amazing spells. But and but I think a lot of people would probably get that. I think at the end of the day, you see the bright and shiny things that are really interesting. But I think most people at the end of the day want to look back at them, at the man or the woman or the person who cast the spell and be like, okay, so what's your story, right? And I think that's the most fun thing about doing a witch is, well, where does my witch fit in from Zantana to
Mm.
like the Wicked Witch of the, like, where does Saoirse fit in? And That would actually probably be a fun thing to do is to draw like a continuum of witches and be like, because there's a lot more out there than people probably think of or remember. I guess I kind of think of Saoirse, she would maybe fit in well with the craft.
Oh yeah,
Maybe she would have been, she might have, could have been pretty easy for her to fall in with that group of girls. That was always one of my favorite
yeah.
witchcraft movies.
That's a very underrated film, by the way. Like, if no one has seen that film, you should really. It's like three amazing actresses, and the entire cast was great. And I thought
Yeah.
the concept was either rather unique for its time in the late '90s, early 2000s, something like that.
Yeah, and another story that goes to some pretty intense places in a way that a lot of stories don't feel comfortable doing. Again, it was an indie movie. It was given a bit of a license to do that. But yeah, The Craft is a if you're a witch nerd and you haven't seen The Craft, then you've got a treat. You have a treat waiting for you
Yeah.
next movie night.
What's 20% of your writing process do you think delivers 80% of the results?
The part where I actually sit down and do it. Um, that's probably the real winning part of that curve, not the 80% where I think about writing, talk about writing, complain about writing. I mean, honestly, it's kind of that simple. It's super annoying for me, and I was literally having this conversation with myself this morning because I'm insane. Um, just about like when I actually I'm really good when I actually have a project to do, like when I'm not in the pitching mode. I actually think I'm really good. Like when I have a deadline, I write consistently. I write a lot. I rarely have writer's block. I do a good enough job of preparing. Every once in a while I'll get into a scene and I'll be like, ooh, I haven't really thought this one at 100%. But like, it's fun. It's not like I don't know where to go. It's like, ooh, what do I want to do with this Rubik's Cube? And I write quickly. Like I get stuff done fast. It's that in between part. It's the pitching. Part of the problem I think is I think what's good about when I'm on a project is that's my focus. It's 100%. What am I doing today? I'm writing The Last Rich. I'm writing Fela. I'm writing whatever. I'm writing Status, a book I'm doing with my wife. Um, it's when I've got like pitching time and I've got like, you know, 15, 18, 22 ideas that I kind of love and they're all like my children and like I have a real inability to differentiate between. I'm not very good at being like Marcus focused
Mm,
and being like, "Oh, sure, Connor, maybe all 22 ideas of yours, maybe they are all genius. Maybe they are. I mean, probably not, but maybe." But hey, you know what? Like this is what people are looking for. So you should be focusing on these four or five. Or if you don't have something in that, like use this little story brain and like come up with something. That part I'm not good at. I get too pulled in too many directions. I do a little bit of work on a lot of things.
mm,
Nothing moves forward very quickly. Um, it's partially one of the reasons why I've had kind of sometimes there've been a lot of larger little breaks is because that pitching stuff I'm not I'm really fast. All my stuff comes out on time. And then I have this kind of longer break where I'm like, but I got 11 ideas. Um, so yes, that part I would say it's the actual sitting down and doing the writing is, and some writers will be like, you suck because that part is actually I find easy. It's the other stuff that I struggle and what I am currently struggling with right now. I've got a book coming out through HarperCollins in October. So we are at the stage now where we're supposed to be giving them our next set of ideas. We have like four or five ideas we really like.
mm.
And I have just been crawling forward a little bit on each one instead of just like knocking one off at a time.
Right.
And it's even a little bit for The Last Witch. Like now is the time to pitch some of the publishers or the publisher behind there and this other book I did Status. And I got lots of ideas, but nothing is really advanced as
Yeah.
far as I would like it to. But having said that, when I was pitching The Last Witch, I went to Boom and I gave them, I don't know, 8 ideas, whatever it was. And like all the other ideas except for The Last Witch had like, 10 to 20 page documents that were ready, right? Here's a little short form, but I knew what I was going to do.
Yeah.
And the last witch was just a paragraph based on a short story I had written because this was the one time where I was like, oh, witches are kind of hot right now. And I have always wanted to do something with this character. And of course, that was the one on a Friday. Boom was like, oh, these are all really cool, but we really love that witch one. Like, I'm sure you've got a lot more to tell us about that. Why don't you talk to us on Monday? Because we don't have time today. And I literally had nothing. And I made some stuff up in the pitch. Like, oh, there's this grandmother character and there's this big twist. I don't know what the big twist was. I just was like, oh, you say there's a big twist. Everybody loves a big
Sure.
twist. You'll figure out what the big twist is when it comes to figure out what the big twist is. It was time to figure out the big twist that weekend because I had 2 days to put that whole story together. And so that was an example, Kurt, where like the 20% of that was hugely productive because it's like, I'm focusing on this. What do I want to do with this? I had this short story that I had based on, which was the first two issues of the comic. And that was hugely productive. Like I came out of that weekend being really proud of myself because I was like, wow, like you did really good work in 2 days. Like that's good on you, man. Like, what if you did that more often? But maybe, pressure makes diamonds, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Last question I have is this here before we wrap up the interview. And I really appreciate you coming on the show here. I've learned so much about The Last Witch. I know we're going to talk about Fella in October. I really can't wait for that because I have some great questions for you and your
Oh,
amazing
good.
artists as well too. But that's for another interview for another time. What is a bad habit in comics you'll defend to the death?
A bad habit in comics. I mean, I don't know. I guess like the one that springs to mind the most, which has become a bit of a trope, is the idea of like no characters ever die kind of thing.
Mm,
Like, there's always, it's always a twin or a clone. But like, I don't know. Isn't that kind of like, the idea of like the death of Captain
mm,
America, the death of Spider-Man, the death of, pick your con, how many times, Superman being held by Dark Side and he's, and you're like, it's the death of Superman, right? I mean, nobody wants that.
right.
Like nobody wants that. So like even though I think that gets they can get bad raps, especially non-comic people, like, oh, the characters are always dying, they're always coming back, or there was a clone. And it's like, yeah, but like that's kind of it's one of the goofy over the top tropes of comics that is fun. Because yeah, honestly, nobody wants that's the end of Peter Parker. He's gone. We're done. Like it's great that Miles Morales exists. I mean, Miles Morales is a great example of one of the maybe the only time in comics where you're like, oh, somebody who came to put on Green Lantern's done this a couple times to be
Right.
fair too, where somebody else has come on and put in the mantle of the costume
Yeah.
and like for an entire generation of people, Miles Morales is Spider-Man,
Yeah.
and he's a great
He
Spider-Man.
is.
Like Miles is he's different than Peter, but he's the same in all the important ways, right? Like the Spider-Verse movies are just
Yeah.
insane, but the last few like Peter Parker Spider-Man movies with Rihanna's boyfriend, why I'm blanking on his name,
Tom Holland.
yeah, like those are amazing. Like
Yeah.
those have been some of the best movies. Like Spider-Man is on a heater right now as far as movies go,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, you don't want these great iconic. I mean, again, it's like killing. It'd be like killing Zeus or Thor or Mars or Aphrodite. And you're like, oh yeah, we just don't do stories about Aphrodite anymore. Love is dead, right? Like, the Greeks and the Romans would not have been like, yeah, we just don't do Aphrodite anymore,
Yeah.
right? Like, of course, that is, they are larger than life figures that should exist forever because the really, really good ones, and for me, Spider-Man is the best of the best. I'm 100% a Spider guy. I just think he is the best comics character ever created. Is just like because you're always going to be able to identify with that. Going back to the Shakespeare stuff, it's looking at someone like Hamlet or Juliet or Falstaff, right? Like they are archetypes that we will always be able to identify with. And one of the things, for those the Kill Shakespeare, which is actually just being relaunched, you can get
Oh.
that as well. The first couple books have been reissued, and the next three are going to be reissued next year. But one of the things about Kill Shakespeare, well, the reason we did it is we're like, what if all these characters got a second act? What if we
Mm.
treated them like comic books? What if you found out that Juliet didn't die in the tomb, that she was actually saved at the last moment, and what you had been told was wrong?
Oh.
And and yeah, you did we have people at first were like, that's so stupid? But did a lot of those same people then actually read the story and be like, this is incredible. Like I love Juliet. I love what you did with your Juliet. Like she turns into Joan of Arc, basically.
Yeah.
She's leading a rebellion. Oh my God, it's totally different than what I thought that character would be, but it feels like it's her. It feels like this is who she could have become,
Mm.
right? Like one of the best compliments of my life was coming from English professors who were like, Kill Shakespeare is amazing because it's given these characters this whole other opportunity to exist that they were not given. But Shakespeare, probably in this environment, yeah, Shakespeare absolutely would have done the same thing, right? And so, yeah, I think that trope of killing off or threatening to kill off a character, um, it's a trope that I'm using in one of the books that's coming up. It's a great trope, and because at the end of the day, if it's executed properly, it's really fun because you're kind of wondering, like, you're either like, oh my gosh, this character is dead, and then you find out how they survived, and if you've done it right, you're like, oh, that's actually really clever. That was cool. Or it's just a trope, and you're like, yeah, I know this is not going to end up this way, but that's okay because if it's a really good story, it's exploring what the death of Superman or Captain America or whomever, what does that apparent death how do the other characters react to it? How does it change them? How does it change Superman, right? And I think that is always interesting ground to step on, especially with heroes. If the hero dies and the quote unquote supporting characters have to step up, what do they do? How does it change them? You know, and that is what I think makes that trope worthwhile. Can it be done poorly? Yeah, of course. So everybody, I'm sure, has great examples of really hackneyed versions of that where you're like, oh my God, it was so stupid. Like, obviously we knew this character wasn't going to die. And the explanation for why they died was dumb. And nobody, it didn't have any emotional effect. Like, it was just a bad story.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the trope is bad. It just means somebody used the trope,
Well,
not the best.
yeah. Well, Connor, I know we could keep talking here, but I got to save some energy for you when it comes to October because that's going to be another exciting interview. But that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. Thank you so much again for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, Kurt. I really appreciate it. It had been way too long, and
Yes.
I really appreciate you ask great questions. You're a wonderful interviewer. So anytime you want to talk to me, I would love to talk to you because yeah, you ask great questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But where can we find you? How can we support you? Where is The Last Witch and anything else you'd like to promote?
All right. So The Last Witch, the book one is called Fear and Fire. You can order it through something like Amazon. Your local comic shop or bookstore can get it. I highly recommend you read that first. Great for any all ages readers or anybody who loves a good fairy tale. Book two, which is called Blood and Betrayal, is just starting to come out. So issue number one was out about a week and a half ago. Issue number two comes out at the end of this month, and then it'll be like every 5 weeks or so. Local comic shop has it, can order it. That'll be collected as a trade in March of next year. We will talk about this later, Kurt, but I've got a new book called Phala. You can go to Phala Graphic Novel to learn more about that. Pre-orders are open, and pre-orders are super important because if you pre-order a book, it tells bookstores to give it a more prominent placement. So if you love this idea, if you love this book about Phala, if you know who Phala is and you're listening to this, go to the Phala Graphic Novel, pre-order it. It'll help other people discover how amazing he was as well. And then yeah, I got a couple other projects, but they're not coming out to the new year, so maybe we'll save those for our next chat.
Sounds good. You're always welcome on the show. It, like you said, it has been far too long. I'm glad we got to catch up, and I really am excited about Fella. I started looking into his amazing works in general when it came to music, it's going to be a fantastic conversation. I really want to dive into that too. But that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. You can, of course, find the podcast at Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO. .podbean.com, or just search Two Geeks Talking where you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening, watching on Two Geeks Talking.